Hello, BookTube. This is my 2022 year in review looking at my reading year. I have read 241 books. Well, 240. I will have read 241 by Saturday, the 31st of December. And while this looks to be a great number, it is the largest amount of books I have ever read. Since I've been keeping track. The bulk of that reading has been manga, Japanese comic books, and I have loved practically every moment I have spent with my burgeoning manga collection. I fell back into love with manga at about midway through last year and started to collect manga again very heavily during the end of last year and definitely in the beginning and pretty much throughout this year. My collection is over here and it is fairly large by my standards. Although a lot of manga fans would go like, no, entire rooms filled with manga, double and triple stacked. But anyway, so manga plus poetry, which I've also really gotten into this year, have really pushed the number of books to the almost 250. But I also had 83 bells this year, and that number has got me depressed. It's got me down. It really argues that my reading year was not as great as it could be, and I think in general there have been a number of disasters for my reading this year, starting from the beginning. I had intended 2022 to be no fiction 2022, in which I would read no fiction, only nonfiction. That project lasted only a few weeks when my name tag TBR, the first 6 books I would be reading in the year, which was inspired by the name tag, which was a tag that made the rounds late last year, in which you would select the first letter of a title that would basically form your name. So I'd select the 6 books to begin to be the first 6 books I read in 2022, and I bailed on all but 2. I have since bail redeemed one and will soon bail redeem another, although I kind of wish I didn't, but I'll get to that later. But yeah, just at 83, and then my other reading projects besides No Fiction 2022, my read of Alan Hollinghurst's novels, the various BookTube events I wanted to join in on, my own personal reading projects, Reading America, my back to school, Bail Redemption, December. My although I think Bail Redemption is basically it's expected. Nonfiction November didn't turn out well. A number of marquee novels that I picked up this year I didn't get on with. My love of science fiction and fantasy has largely cratered to where it's so despite my newfound love of manga and poetry and still some really strong books that I did read and finish, it's just this year has been disappointing, I think, on the whole. And maybe in 2022 I should really embrace the chaos and not try to be so ordered in my reading. Although, given the number of BookTube projects or reading projects and what have you, I seem to be setting up for 2023. Yeah. Anyway, so what I'm going to do for the rest of this video is basically put on a bit of an award show. and I will basically have a number of categories, and I'll show some books and see how it goes, and it might be a regular feature. It is something I've been thinking about lately, of maybe like a number of booktubers getting together and doing a sort of end of year wrap up awards show, sort of like if you've ever seen the McLaughlin Group. Like at the end of every year, they would do a 2-part episode where they would basically review the year that's ending and give out awards. But anyway, so let's get to my awards and merit, whatever the opposite of that is, because there's also some pretty bad books I'm going to be talking about too. So let's start with the bails. The most frustrating bail of 2022 has got to be Tokyo Revengers by Ken Wakui. This is a manga series that I desperately wanted to love. I've wanted to read it ever since I first heard about it. I love the artwork. It is amazing. But the writing, the story, the characters just I don't like at all. And I'm frustrated about that. But again, I really need to recognize I'm not going to get on with every book. And it's okay to bail and walk away. Here. The most disturbing bail of 2022 has got to be Frisk by Dennis Cooper. This is a weird novel that is just Dennis Cooper's standard weird shit. The most infuriating, rage-inducing bail has got to go to Dog by Susan McHugh, which is part of the Animal series from Reaction Books. This is one of the ones that unfortunately is basically just literary criticism about dogs and literature and human culture, and it's bad literary criticism at that. Really bad literary criticism. And the bail for which I wish I just left well enough alone is Lakota America by Pekka Hamalainen. This book is one of the ones that formed my name tag TBR at the beginning of the year. It's about the Lakota people, a Native American people, and I'm currently reading it. I will finish it Saturday at the rate I'm going, which will be a week, and it's rather a week I wish I had back. I will talk a lot more about this tomorrow in Weekly Reads, but suffice it to say, I'm not getting on with this book at all. Even though there is nothing really that is making me want to bail, except for I'm just tired of it. Moving on to the worst books that I managed to actually read. Let me reorganize them into the order for which I want to yell at them at. Here we go. So at number 5 is 1000 Years of Manga by Brigitte Koyama Richard. And again, these are the worst 5 books. Translated from the French by David Rezinowitz. So this is an introduction to manga that is lavishly illustrated. And while the history of manga is well done, once Koyama Richard gets to 20th century manga as it is today, the book kind of takes a dive for the worse. And I think if you are a fan of manga, you will be looking for like more information on manga in general. So you're going to be disappointed because most of what Koyama Richard focuses on is manga that sort of refer back to earlier periods. So she's really more interested in historical manga than anything else. At number 4 is Tutankhamun's Trumpet by Toby Wilkinson. This is the history of ancient Egypt told in a very unique way, in 100 objects found in Tutankhamun's tomb. The problem is that while this is interesting, it's repetitive. The book is organized into 10 chapters of 10 items, and while it is thankfully not a list, those 10 chapters do repeat and get repetitive. Particularly, there's a chapter on war, which is repeated, and one on kingship. There's one on agriculture and I think food, and it's sort of repeated in another chapter. And the repetitions sort of, just it ruins the book. And I think in a way there's maybe hints of laziness too. At number 3 is Persians by Lloyd Llewellyn-Jones. This is a history of the Persians. And while I liked a good chunk of the book, there's a middle dip where the culture of society of the Persians is explored, which, while necessary, it does unfortunately still the narrative thrust of the overall narrative book. But I think what infuriates me most about this book and what made it onto my worst list is that the one reign that got any deep attention was largely because it is spectacularly soap operatic and really an aberration, since none of the other reigns really got nearly as much attention. At number 2 is Egypt's Golden Couple by John and Colleen Darnell. This is a dual biography of Akhenaten and Nefertiti and a reign study of Akhenaten. And I guess if you want to see Nefertiti as having a tremendous amount of influence, Nefertiti too. The problem with this book is that the opening chapters, or the opening paragraphs of each chapter, is a dramatic reimagining, fictionalization of something that's covered. And it goes nowhere, it adds nothing to the narrative at all. And also in certain chapters, the Darnells will appear in a sort of a memoirish way that, again, except for maybe in the conclusion, doesn't really add anything to the overall book. And in a way, as I was reading, I'm thinking, well, maybe you should have written a historical novel featuring Akhenaten and Nefertiti, or wrote a archaeological memoir or something. Anyway, so that was frustrating. And the worst book I finished in 2022 is Spider by Katarzyna and Sergei Mikulski. This is, again, part of the Animal series from Reaction Books, this time featuring literary criticism of the spider in a Freudian way. And maybe it's just I despise psychoanalytic literary criticism with a thunderous passion, or I don't know, but sometimes arachnophobia is caused not for some psychosexual baloney, but because your father threw a live spider into your hair when you were a little girl. Anyway, let's get to some more positive stuff. So 2022 has seen my um, me continue to have some issues with fiction. I mean, largely my love of science fiction has cratered over the past few years. And I've always had a rocky relationship with more realistic or literary fiction. But this year did surprise me in that I had two novels that I really enjoyed. One in translation, Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, translated by Sophie Hughes. This is a phenomenal novel set in Mexico about a group of young men who murder a transgender bruja. And it is dark and brutal, and I am completely shocked that I like it as much as I do, because I don't usually go for this sort of stuff. And I also really enjoyed Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. This is the winner of the Booker Prize from 2019. And it's about a group of women in contemporary Britain and one non-binary individual. And this book is phenomenal. I really enjoyed it immensely. Moving on to poetry. The 5 best poetry collections I read in 2022 for the first time are Hosts and Guests by Nate Klug. This is a really fine collection. I'm not very good at poetry, so I'm just going to basically just say their names because they're great. Number 4 is First Nights by Niall Campbell. 3 is Almanac by Austin Smith. Number 2, and this is a really great collection. I really like Evie Shockley's work in general, is Semi-Automatic, her most recent collection. And my number 1 is Tinto Tinto by Marina Carrera. This is just wonderful. I loved nearly every poem. This is a wonderful collection. Okay. Moving on to the 10 best nonfiction, I guess. At number 10 is Unsettled Land by Sam W. Haynes. This is a history of Texas's war of independence from Mexico and its eventual annexation to the United States. At number 9 is In Hitler's Munich by Michael Brenner, translated by Jeremiah Reimer. This is history of Munich from 1918 to the early 1920s. Basically basically the end of the First World War to the Bierhoff Putsch. And it's basically about Munich in this period, how the city became increasingly more anti-Semitic, what life was like for Jews living in Munich at the time. This is a phenomenal book. I really enjoyed it. And number 8 is The Ottomans by Mark David Baer. This is a history of the Ottoman Empire and the dynasty that led it. This is a great book. I really enjoyed it. At number 7 is The Horde by Marie Favreau. This is a wonderful exploration of the Golden Horde, one of the constituent hordes of the Mongol Empire. At number 6 is the monumental, literally, Maria Theresa by Barbara Stolberg-Rillinger, translated by Robert Savage. This book was just, I loved it. I really loved this book. It was a phenomenal read. Um, Despite its heft, I did not begrudge it the heft at all. At number 5 is The Impeachers by Brenda Wineapple. This is the history of the impeachment of Andrew Johnson, and I really enjoyed it. At number 4 is Weavers, Scribes, and Kings by Amanda H. Podany. This is a history of the ancient Near East that is absolutely phenomenal. It looks at the history of the Near East through the history of cuneiform writing, and it's a brilliant way of doing it because it enlivens the history with the voices of so many people who are so often neglected in history. And I love this book despite it not really having a conclusion or an ending, like a proper summation conclusion. Wonderful book. Would love to see more histories like it, particularly of the ancient Near East. At number 3 is Blood on the River by Marjolaine Kars. This is a history of the Berbice slave revolt in the 18th century, and it is phenomenal. Won last year's Kundal Prize. At number 2 is Cuba in American History by Ada Ferrer. This won the Pulitzer Prize and was one of the 2 runners-up for this year's Kundal Prize. It's a history of Cuba and through the lens of its toxic relationship with the United States. And number 1 is South to Freedom by Alice L. Baumgartner. This is a history of African American slaves fleeing not north to Canada but south to Mexico, who, in the aftermath of Texas's secession from Mexico, so Mexico became increasingly an emancipatory republic, to the point where runaway slaves were actively defended when their owners or their owners' agents came to try to take them back to Texas. This is a phenomenal book. I really loved it, and it is by definitely my number 1 of the year. Moving on to other categories, my finds of the year. I have 2. So one is at long last acquiring The Last Medieval Queens by J.L. Lainsmith. This is a history of the last few queens of England before the Tudor dynasty, and it is phenomenal. I've wanted this book for a long time, and I got it this year. And I'm also thrilled to have finally completed Fairy Tail by Hiro Mishima, my favorite manga series. I have the other 62 volumes over here, and I will be reading the entire series come January 1st, which I am super excited for. I cannot wait for it. The 2 manga series that I really enjoyed this year, and for which I really couldn't come up with a category for, but I did want to shout them out, are Tolipan Hanaka-kun by Aida Iro and Eden Zero by Hiro Mishima. Hiro Mishima is definitely my favorite mangaka, or creator of manga. And I think the single greatest reading experience of 2022, the one that I think maybe wipes away those 83 bales, is my reading at the beginning of September of Full Metal Alchemist by Hiromu Arakawa. This is one of the greatest manga series ever. It's about 2 brothers, Edward and Alphonse Elric, who are prodigy alchemists in the country of Amestris. One day they attempt to bring back their deceased mother by performing human transmutation and illegal transmutation. the transmutation fails, and the brothers are grievously wounded. Edward loses a leg, Alphonse loses his whole body. To save Alphonse's life, Edward sacrifices an arm to transcribe Alphonse's soul onto a suit of armor. Years later, and with Automel prosthetics, Edward becomes a state alchemist, a dog of the military. He uses his position to research the Philosopher's Stone, an alchemical artifact reputed to be able to bypass the law of equivalent exchange. As the brothers journey across the Mestras, they discover the truth about the Philosopher's Stone and stumble upon a long-running conspiracy that goes to the very heart of Mestras, and sees both brothers and a number of their allies as important pieces in the Promised Day. I love this series immensely, and I loved every moment I spent with Fullmetal Alchemist in September. It was just glorious, absolutely glorious. So that's pretty much my 2022. I have 2 more videos coming tomorrow to wrap up the year. I will have a book haul early in the day. It's tame compared to my psychotic November haul, and then I will have a final weekly reads of 2022, in which I extol the virtues of the 7 deadly sins and question why the heck I spent a week with Lakota America. Anyway, BookTube, that's all I got for now because I'm nearing 30 minutes, and it's going to take me a while to put these books up. I won't be leaving any books in the show notes because it's a lot of books, and I'm kind of losing some energy right now, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now. So thank you, BookTube. Have a great evening. See you tomorrow with the last 2 videos of 2022. And until then, stay safe and stay warm.